Hello world, and today on Nerdy Hessian, we will be discussing underground comics. Well, the birth of them at least. Well, before we dive in, make sure to leave a like and subscribe before I show you the props. Now, underground comics can range from very literary important works like Mouse by R Spiegelman, which is based off of his real life and families and stuff in the Holocaust, living afterwards. Even something by more modern artists with Craig Yo, who, if you don't know, was related to, well, not related by family, but by working with Jim Henson. You know, the Muppets and things, and if you ever watched any of the older Muppet stuff, it was really trippy and very akin to acid. And really inspired by underground comics. And I've already talked about it, so let's show Fat Freddy's cat. But underground comics started with one key figure, R Crumb. And he was the father of underground comics. And before we talk about when he made the first underground comic, let's talk about his career beforehand, because he did like Hallmark greeting card art. And he found it very miserable after a time. He moved out to California, if I'm not mistaken, and he got introduced to LSD, the psychedelic music from Jimi Hendrix and Grateful Dead, and met influences like Rick Griffin. And he started doing underground comic work since he was already an artist of such before with the greeting cards. And it wasn't the first underground comic in a sense of it being a sequential art instead of a comic book, because Evo, the underground newspaper from New York, featured underground comic strips beforehand. But it was a newspaper, so let's go ahead and separate that for it. But I've also already talked about it, because the first underground comics was his Zap Comix, specifically issue number 1, not 0, since that came out afterwards. But it later became one of the biggest reasons that underground comics were killed off. Well, they didn't really get killed off, but they weren't able to maintain a safe sale until the likes of Kitchen Sink, Fantagraphics, and other mainstream publishers took over and did stuff like that. But even later down the line, there were hard times. Like, I want to say another comic book called Boiled Angel literally had the artist writer where he was arrested and fined and had to be on like a watch list type deal. So, you know, there were still dangers, and you were still secluded to only selling to like head shops or more risque comic book shops. And by risque, I mean they were more open to take risk instead of, you know. But getting back into it, the way he sold his underground comic, which underground comics were big against mainstream, they were trying to be more shock and awe, very much like the Odd Future era of Tyler the Creator, like I've mentioned before in a previous video. But there is some irony to the birth of comic books, or underground comic books, because R Crumb sold his first printing of Zap Comic number 1 in California on the streets of, let me see, a Craig Yo book from the underground. I wish I had dog-marked it, but I don't like doing that to books. I want to say it was Anaheim. Yeah. On Haight-Ashbury, where he was selling his underground comics in a baby carriage. Now, the irony of it is that going against the mainstream media of comics, where they were trying to be more family friendly and kid friendly, by him selling stuff about drugs and sets and violence and a baby carriage is honestly funny in my opinion. But that's about it for the video. Hopefully you found something out intriguing or nerdy at the least. But as always, keep nerding out and have a good one.